Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Activism webinar on Ecofeminism with Lisa Kemmerer and your host, myself, which I'm Lisa Levinson. I'm the director of the Sustainable Activism Campaign for In Defense of Animals. And we are so excited to have Lisa Kemmerer here with us today to share her wisdom about ecofeminism and how it relates to our animal activist work. Before that, I just want to announce that this month, February, is officially Animal Activist Appreciation Month at In Defense of Animals, and this is one of our events that we're celebrating all of the activists' amazing work with. So stay tuned for all kinds of different events that we're doing this month. We're having activist award nominations. We're also going to have a Valentine's Day meme that you can share with other activists to show how much you appreciate them and what they're doing. So it's all about animals, people who help animals helping each other this month, and that's our goal. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little more information about Lisa. So we're really glad that she's here today. And so Lisa is a professor of philosophy and religions at Montana State University, Billings. She's a philosopher activist working on behalf of non-human animals, the environment, and disempowered human beings. She's a graduate of Reed, Harvard, and Glasgow University in Scotland, and she has written and edited 9 books, including Eating Earth, Dietary Choice and Environmental Health, Animals and World Religions, Animals and the Environment, and also Sister Species, Women, Animals, and Social Justice. So you can learn more about Lisa and her work at lisakemmerer.com, and I'll go ahead and post that in the chat box for those who are with us online, so you can get that information. And so I'm super excited to, having gone through the introduction, and to actually allow Lisa to share a little bit herself. So welcome, Lisa. We're so happy to have you with us.
Hi, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yay. So we're very excited, and this is our special, our Sustainable Activism webinars. They're really designed to help activists with all kinds of topics, and I think what you're sharing tonight is really going to help people. So one, to let folks know that I'm handling some of the tech side of the call, and what that means is if you have any technical concerns, feel free to chat them in the chat box, and I'll be reading that. And if you have any questions for Lisa, you can also write them in the chat box, and I'll go ahead and share those with her, and while we're here together. So the way the structure of the call tonight will be, Lisa will be sharing more in a lecture format for the first part of it, and then afterwards we'll shift into a Q&A format where you'll be able to ask questions either on your phone or through your mic in your computer or through the chat box. So we'll let you know when we get to that part of the program, but meanwhile, I'm going to pull up Lisa's slides for her PowerPoint, and I may disappear, my face, for those of you who are online, but I will return when we do our Q&A, and I'm always here in the background, so if you have any questions, feel free to direct them towards me in the chat box. So let me get the slides going here.
Okay, it's exciting. There we go. Look at that.
Great, wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, and just for folks who are online, if you want, you can maximize, you can make it larger by going to the upper right corner of the document. Then if you hover over there, you'll see it says maximize.
Right, so the reason I like to talk about ecofeminism is I kind of snuck into it from the side. I actually began as an environmentalist when I was very young, but then became an animal activist, increasingly so. And my collection of books that I've written, if you look at them here, the anthologies and the books, they're just right across the map of ecofeminism. And that was not by design. It was just kind of by chance. As I kept researching and I kept thinking and I kept being an activist, I kept pulling on these other threads of things that were important. And there's still a whole lot more out there that I need to continue working on. But I think the more you get into animal advocacy, the more you find out things are connected. I think maybe that's true of all activisms, and if it's not, it should be. Here's some of my favorite books if you're interested in learning more on connections. And I'll do a shout out, of course, to those who've come before, who've just done tremendous work. Carol Adams has been a terrific help to me and encouragement. Marty Keel, unfortunately, no longer with us, but a beautiful person. Greta Gard, Josephine Donovan. So these are some of the people that you can find their books, you can read their articles. My personal favorite is The Pornography of Meat, and I like it because it connects feminism and animals, which gets you up and running. And it has lots of pictures, and I like lots of pictures. And then there's Animals and Women and Ecofeminism, with a name like Ecofeminism. You know that one's going to be topical. And Animals and Women, same. So just here's some resources if you want to read further. So I want to look at theory a little bit. I want to recognize that it's a developing theory, that ecofeminism isn't very old. It was born in roughly the 70s. So it's varied. Like when feminists do something, they never, well, there's no force, there's no dominance, there's no hierarchy. So there's always lots of threads whenever you have feminists doing anything. It's more of a collective. And this is certainly true with ecofeminism. So it's varied, it's not one entity, and it continues to develop. Can you hear me, Lisa? Is all well?
Oh yeah, all is well.
Okay, that's good. So ecofeminism, what is it? It's the idea that the denigration and exploitation of women and the natural world are linked. So this idea that when we look out at our world and we see how it's being destroyed, that is somehow, some way connected to the fact that women are also being exploited and harmed. So that's the essence of what ecofeminism is. So then the question becomes how? How can we see this? How can we work against it? So I want to hit up a few things that are my personal, I think they're some of the strongest threads that ecofeminism pulls on. So we'll look at worldviews that demonstrate exploitation across species barriers and into the natural world. We'll look at how language shows this, and we'll look at types of oppression. Value dualisms, these are familiar to all of us. So they're false dualisms. So for instance, male and female. We have this idea that there's man and there's woman, and there's nothing in between, and that these are dualistic opposites. So first of all, there's lots of stuff in between. And second, there's no reason to see these as opposites. So the important thing would be maybe humanity that binds men and women. So there's black and white. There's mind and body. There's nature, humanity, civilization, and nature. There's human and animal. So these are the dualisms that we create. And so these dualisms are false, first of all, right? The obvious one, right? If you take human and animal, if you take human and nature or civilization nature, so we're part of nature and we're animals. So these are false dualisms, and then a value is put on them. So you can imagine these boxes. There's A on the left, not A on the right, and all of the ones on the left that are A would be things like man and Caucasian and civilization and human. Those are the ones on the left. And then in the not A box on the right, you would have things like not man, not Caucasian, not civilization, not human. All right, so that's what are supposed to be in those boxes. And we not only divide into false dualistic categories, but then we put a value on them. So the standard of judgment is what is on the left. It's the male, it's the human, it's the mind. So then this devalues everything that's in the not A category on the right. So we have to remember that not only are these dualisms not true, but then we put a value on them. We assume one is better than the other. One way to recognize this is whenever you see a medical model, traditionally down through time, it's always been male. That's the standard. The male body is standard. Things that are male are viewed, we'll use the word man, we use the word guy. If you're going to refute to humankind hasn't been the word we've used, it's been mankind. So these are all evidences that the standard vision of the good and the right and the true is on the A side. All right, now, not only do you have these two categories, there is a relationship between them. So all of the ones on the left are related, and all of the ones in the not A category are also assumed to be related, so that we find women connected with non-human animals, and we find non-human animals connected with people of color, and we find women associated with nature. So the things in the right become associated with one another, and the dominance and exploitation of the things on the right over all the things on the left. All right, I wish I could say to you, am I making sense? Do you follow? But I guess you'll tell me in Q&A if anything hasn't made sense to you. So let's look at language. So we've looked at dualism. Let's look at language. So our words show us that we connect the feminine with the natural world. So we have terms like Mother Nature. Why should nature be feminine? Why should it be Mother Nature? Why mother or father? Realistically, it makes no sense, but we have viewed nature as Mother Nature. We talk about land as fertile, and view nature as being fertile. Well, that would make sense as long as we didn't associate fertility with femininity or with females, right? Males and females are equally fertile, but that's not how we view it. It's the female that is considered fertile because her body is viewed. Remember, we had the dualism of mind and body. Women are related to their bodies much more than men's are. Male are considered mind, women body. So when you talk about fertile land, that's something much more associated with women. Virgin forests, which of course then can be raped. And I've read myths as far back, 2,000-year-old myths that talk about plowing the fields as a is metaphor the right word? Is a metaphor for men having sex with women. So we have all of these linguistic representations of the feminization of nature. We also have language showing us that women are associated with other animals. And not only are they associated with other animals, but invariably they're extremely negative. Now, there are a few that associate males with other animals, like stud, but they're much more positive. Dog might be a little more negative, but there's just a few for males, and many of them are strong and positive, or at least positive and negative. With women, they tend to be sexist, negative, and there are a lot of them. So our language shows us how women and animals are associated with one another and considered to be related. Now, Carol Adams has done some of the best work of showing connections between, and her book Pornography of Meat shows this. Here's the cover to my book, my anthology Sister Species, and notice how the image of the chicken's dead body and the woman's body are related in a way it's actually very similar to other things you'll see in marketing that I'll show later. So notice how this chicken's legs don't bend that way as this corpse's legs. Notice the eyes, which are large and have eyelashes, unlike a chicken's eyes. The pose is completely feminine, and it's also a very sexual pose. Carol Adams would call it a rear entry pose. Other images show us how women and animals are both turned, again, related to bodies, not minds, and they are commodified. They are here for others. They are instrumental. So here you see a largely pig's body with big breasts in what would be a human female pose. And on the other side, you see a pig juxtaposed with a female body with meat covering the pubic area. These images show us how women and animals are related. This is a meme that I made recently and posted. So, and it shows us too, if you look at this image of the chicken with the, I guess it's a bikini transposed over it, showing the feminine and the chicken corpse as, what's it called, transposed, one transposed over the other. So the types of oppression and exploitation, and we're going to have a lead into this, obviously. If you look at the images we've looked at, we see how oppression and exploitation of factory farmed animals relates very closely to the oppression of women as sexual bodies, sexualized bodies, objectification. So females are objectified, sexualized, and given an instrumental value. So here we see a chicken leg and a woman's leg put together in such a way that they echo one another. And this is, of course, a dead chicken's leg prepared for human consumption. The woman's leg is a living female leg, but it is also prepared and presented for consumption. So there's a direct parallel. Here's some other examples. So you see the chicken who you know the chicken wants to be out in the grass, eating, dusting, hanging out with the other chickens, sleeping in the sun, doing the things that chickens do. But here we see the vision of the chicken as if she's presenting her body, her leg, for our consumption. And the pose isn't a mistake, but this is the chicken is turned into a female presenting her leg. So the consumers are viewed as males, the objectified, consumed are female. And in the middle image, which Carol Adams, I think, chose this for the front of her cover of The Sexual Politics of Meat, if I remember right. And this one, you can see how the female body is cut up just like other animal bodies for the consumption. And you recognize the consumer as likely to be a male. To me, one of the most gross, I guess is the best word, is this turkey hooker and I've never cooked a turkey, but I assume this hook thing, looking at the pictures, you scoop, it's like a rape, you put it up through the dead carcass's body and notice the line, easy pickup, right, from pan to platter. So you see the language, the hooker, the pickup, they're playing on sexual terms, availability of females for male exploitation, and they're juxtaposing the chicken and the woman. Objectified, sexualized, and instrumental value. So here again, we see women and cows objectified. Their intellect, their minds don't matter. What matters here is their bodies, and what matters about their bodies is how they can be used by others. And those others are, you can see that they're male others, so the ones in power are men. These images are made for the male viewing eye, and the cow and the woman are sexualized, and their value is not that it's not inherent. It is not because they are marvelous and glorious and sentient and thinking beings in themselves with interests of their own and lives of their own. What matters about these images is what they can give men. And that's why you see the female looking like a cow. And cows are, of course, exploited for their milk. When you see the black and white, you have a cow exploited in the dairy. And with her breasts popping out of the black and white, I'm a cow costume. I am a female, exploit me for my breasts, exploit me for my milk, exploit my body. I'm not about my mind. And on the left, again, the cow, sexualized. I'm all about my body, exploit me. So again, this transposing of the feminine over the animal, the non-human animal, and the transposing of the non-human animal over the feminine. So these are ways that we can see that there's no question that this is happening. This isn't just a theory that's come out of the air and is like, where does that come from? Well, it's really obvious that this is something that we are doing. All right, so consumable bodies, objectified, sexualized, and instrumental value. So again, remembering that other animals and women are in the not A category, and they are viewed as commodities for exploitation by those on the A side, the males, the male Caucasian mind, civilization that's on the left-hand side, the A side of that initial box that didn't have the words in it. All right, so they have been sexualized. So notice these legs, right? These aren't just any legs. These are the shaven, trim. These are the perfect legs for a man, not for a woman, but for a man, right? They're upside down. She can't do much with those legs. She's being put through the grinder. She's a piece of meat, literally. So the instrumental value of women and other animals as consumable, sexualized objects for males. The animals that suffer the most are females. So moving to the idea of how this affects the feminine. The animals that suffer the most are females. And it's because of the way they're exploited, and it's because of their female biology. So chickens, for example, we know that the intense confinement of chickens is, I would say sows and chickens are the most confined. Oh, and veal calves. So right, sows, that's female. The chickens, they are female for laying the eggs. And the veal calves are part of an exploitive female industry. So recognizing that because of this way that females are used, the way that their female biology is exploited for consumption, causes non-human animals to suffer, female non-human animals to suffer considerably more than other animals. So one of the other worst suffering cases is for milk. So the cows are treated like units of production to provide milk. Their calves are taken right after they're born. They're put into the veal crates you see on the right. And why does that happen? Why are these calves deprived of their mothers? Why are these mothers deprived of their beloved calves? So that we can have milk. So because of the female biology of these cows, because they are able to bear young, and because when they are impregnated, and they are forcibly impregnated every year so that they can bear these young, when this happens, they produce milk. And because that milk can be sold and is valuable to those who exploit these cows, cows are exploited because of and for their female biology. So hens are exploited for their eggs, and they're kept in those battery cages. Cows are exploited for their milk, and because of that, the veal industry exists. And the cows, of course, the veal is treated terribly, but the cows also suffer because of the loss of their calves, because for 6 years they're repeatedly impregnated and their babies are taken from them. And they produce way more milk than is natural, so they also suffer from problems related to that. We got a new slide?
Yes, we do.
It's working. So what's interesting is that we seem to harbor just as we harbor very much an ignorance and indifference to the suffering of females in our culture. And I know as a female how I feel. I feel like I'm not worth very much. I never get anything right. I often hate myself. There's nothing right about me. These general negative attitudes that we get about ourselves from a culture that views us as things and not beings, and is very critical of us because we're here for someone else. We're not here for ourselves. We're not about our own minds. So we tend to be very blind to that in our culture. And I certainly see this in my students, that they don't recognize how they're viewed and how sexism and male domination affects them. It's the same for animals that are exploited in animal agriculture because of their biology. We seem so indifferent. If you look at this sow and you imagine being stuck in this tiny crate, producing litter after litter, unable to get up, unable to move around, unable to stick your nose in the dirt, unable to do all of the things that a pig would normally choose to do in their life. This is incredible suffering. And why? It's because they are objectified, because they have an instrumental value. And what is that instrumental value? It is their female biology. It is because they can produce young that they are treated in this way. The boys aren't. They don't live as long, but their lives are not nearly as painful as those of the females. So here's a chart that I made. I actually made this for Joanne MacArthur's wonderful Unbounded project. And it's kind of compiled from Sister Species and Speaking Up for Animals, the two books that the two anthologies where women's voices speak about connections between women and animals, as well as some voices speak also about other critical links like racism, heterosexism, and others that are linked, ableism, ageism, classism, remembering that these are all connected, not just sexism. So here's a chart that shows how we can see the suffering of females. It's in years. Not only do they suffer in particularly painful ways, like having their babies taken away from them, like being forced into pregnancy, like being milked year after year and carrying more milk than is natural for you, like producing 200 times the amount of eggs that you are biologically designed to produce. I'm actually not sure if 200 times is accurate, but it is monumentally more than chickens would normally produce in the wild. So this shows the tremendous suffering that the female, 7 times as long for cows, 12 times as long for sows, and 12 times as long again for hens. So you can see the producing, the battery cages that they suffer, the gestation and farrowing crates that the sows suffer, and the rape racks, the cows, the taking away of their young for the veal industry, and the repeated impregnation, forced impregnation. So this is a quote from Speaking Up for Animals. So feminists lobby against sex wage discrepancies, gays fight homophobic laws, and the physically challenged demand greater access, each fighting for injustices that affect their lives and or the lives of their loved ones. Yet these dedicated activists usually fail to make even a slight change in their consumer choices for the sake of much more egregious, oppressed, and exploited individuals. Which is to say that the women who do catch on that we are being exploited and mistreated and treated very badly as females in a male-dominated culture, fail to make the connection that the biology of these animals is being exploited similarly and bringing them equally egregious suffering, and that they're causing it by consuming these products. And that it isn't, I never say that feminists need to be animal activists if their cause is feminism. They don't need to hit the lines for animals any more than I need to turn into a full-fledged feminist if my main cause is animal activism. What we need to do is stop exploiting. So they need to quit eating eggs and quit drinking milk and never wear furs and never do the things that cause exploitation to other animals. That's the minimum requirement. Now, it's wonderful. They should, of course, speak out. They should help others to understand these connections. But at a minimum, animal activists must speak out against sexism and must take a stand against sexism. And not at a minimum, they must not be sexist in their own lives. And at a minimum, feminists must not consume animal products and help to oppress female animals in that way. This slide, this meme says, while it is important to fight for one's own liberation, it is counterproductive, not to mention selfish and small-minded, to fight for one's own liberation while willfully continuing to oppress others. And this is my statement to the feminists. I remember the first time I spoke to a group of feminists. I'm so clueless, and I get myself into so much trouble by assuming the goodness of humanity. It's just so often not there. Oh, they just hated me. They just did not. They were there at a feminist conference to deal with the problems of feminism, and they simply didn't want to hear anything about someone else that they might be oppressing. Now, on the one hand, I understand that. Oppressed women don't want someone showing up. If I had been a man, it would have been just plain wrong to show up and say, look, you're exploiting too. But I'm not. I'm a woman. And I'm saying, look, we are exploiting too, and we need to stop exploiting. So it is very selfish to want our own liberation without working for the liberation of others. And again, the worst problem is when we continue to exploit these others, usually out of ignorance, unfortunately, sometimes out of indifference. This meme says, it makes no sense for any social justice activist to willfully exploit factory farmed animals. As a matter of consistency and solidarity, social justice activists must reject dairy products, eggs, and flesh. And that's a quote from Speaking Up for Animals, one of my anthologies on women. All right, so a brief review. Ecofeminism is the idea that the denigration and the exploitation of women in the natural world are linked. So animals, as part of what we consider to be nature of the natural world, are linking female human animals with other animals, is an example of what that kind of connection that ecofeminism is talking about, as well as our language, how we talk about virgin forests and the rape of the land and plowing the fields, and how we approach women as sexual objects rather than individual entities, beings with minds and intents of their own. And then looking at the types of oppression that come from that exploitation and oppression, and I looked largely at animal agriculture, looking at the 3 worst industries, which are the dairy industry, the egg industry, and the treatment of sows, the three places where the exploitation of women intersects with the exploitation of animals as a feminist concern, that female biology is being exploited in painful and cruel ways. All right, so that's what I've got. I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing all of this really interesting information. Some of the images were new to me and very powerful. I would love to hear what other people have to say as well. So what I'm going to do is switch. We're going to close this presentation, and I'm going to add myself back on here so we can field questions together. And then I'm going to change the format into a Q&A, which means that other folks will be able to ask questions. So far we're having some positive comments on the chat box, folks saying thanks so much for the presentation, they really liked it, and that they'll check these things out. Just wondering
Awesome.
if anyone has any comments about some of the issues that Lisa brought up, and especially that one being at a feminist conference and then mentioning the issues going on with animals. I think that must have been very surprising to get that sort of negative feedback from folks there.
It was traumatizing. They were so rude. They were so angry. And yet, in time, I've come to understand it. I do understand that when you show up to talk about your suffering and someone else comes up and wants to talk about someone else's suffering, it's not going to go over very well. I just didn't have that insight then.
Yeah, that's true. But I think there's also a movement afoot to be more inclusive now and to start to think that way, to change our way of thinking.
Yes.
And here's a question from Julia Orr, an activist and feminist who I know well.
Hi, Julia.
She asks, is there a point in history where the exploitation of women and the exploitation of animals started, or maybe when did it start? I think she's asking.
Oh, okay. Now, remember how I said that feminists, and I love this about them, you put all the cards on the table and you need all the cards to make the deck. So feminists and ecofeminists are just like this. There's lots of theories out there as to how this got started. So, for example, one theory is that it's the patriarchal religions, that when the goddess was supplanted with the god, then the nurturing, the fertility, the things that had been respected and honored in women became denigrated, as you see in some of the stories of the Bible. Another idea is that with industrialization, with the commodification of other things, women became commodified, turned into objects in that way, saleable. Babies became things that you could sell, and through industrialization. So is there a time? Well, it depends on which theory you go with. And there are a handful that point to different ideas that could be where it started. And I like that. I like that there's different possibilities. I like that we can say, well, maybe it hasn't always been this way. Maybe there were things that changed it, and maybe we can go back and we can look at these different things that have perhaps led to this type of oppression. And if we can be aware of them and in some ways undo them, we have a chance of becoming better people.
Thanks, Lisa. And we also, here's someone who wants to speak up. Please ask your question.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Lisa.
You're welcome.
I would just like to make a few points.
Can you say your name for us?
Please.
Oh, sure. It's Rafaela from New York.
Hi,
Rafaela. Great. Thanks, Rafaela.
I have the impression that vegan feminism rests upon the philosophical viewpoint that the animal industry is built on the exploitation of the female reproductive system, right? How do you think women who are trans feel when they hear this? Do you think they feel validated as real women, or do you think they feel included in this category of female? I'm just
I missed that word. Women who are what?
How do you think women who are trans feel?
Oh, trans.
Yeah, when they hear this statement, do you think they feel validated as real women, or do you think there's a way that we could perhaps be more inclusive of trans women when we're talking about animal agriculture and the exploitation of animals?
Thank you for that wonderful question. Now, this gets into all the stuff that I couldn't get to in the 30 to 40 minutes that I was suggested that I talk. And as I mentioned, there are other links. It isn't just sexism. It's linked to heterosexism. It's linked to ableism, ageism, racism, classism. And I probably left out at least one or two. But so the link here would be with heterosexism. So the way to make those connections with trans folks and all their suffering and our world, our communities, our culture's treatment of trans people, it seems to me, is to recognize this idea of production and reproduction that comes out of it. And this is one of the places that, with Julia's question, where it started, this idea of production and reproduction, and how this turned women and many non-human animals into bodies to produce young for money. So heterosexism is all about, you don't want men with men and women with women. That's not going to be productive. You're not going to produce anything. You're not going to produce soldiers to be killed in war. You're not going to produce warm butts to sit in the pews. So the church's not going to like it. The state's not going to like it. So we need to have babies. We need to have man and woman in the conventional sense. So this idea of heterosexism, like sexism and speciesism, is linked. So trans folks, of course, also don't fit into the category of we want you to be a man or a woman and produce babies. So recognizing that no one's body is here for someone else to judge, to put into dualistic categories, or to use for their purposes. And this should be a fundamental tenet of animal activists and of feminists, and this carries right over to those fighting heterosexism and all of those in cisgender, those who benefit from having the standard acknowledged gender, the classic male or female, which is called cisgender privilege. So I think that's the bridge that unites those two. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's a very important question and a very good question.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thanks to everyone for their questions. We have a few in the chat box. I'll go over a few of those, and if anyone else wants to share using their voice, please just chime in. That's fine too. So let's see. One question was how to have a conversation on this topic with a meat eater while avoiding an argument.
Oh, wow. I think probably there's half the people out there would have different ideas on this. And there's so many wonderful ways to do this. My sense is you want to find the commonality. And this is one of the reasons I love working with religions. If you know someone's religion, you've got commonality. And my book, Animals and World Religions, gives you the way to deal with anyone from a faith background in this. It shows you exactly how what they're doing, if they're exploiting and hurting animals, conflicts with the most fundamental tenets. So that's one example. So sorry, my computer just went dead, so I got distracted. So the question was, how to deal with someone how to talk to someone without creating arguments. So again, finding commonality. So that's one way. And another way, if someone doesn't belong to a religious tradition, I think people, in my better moments, in my more positive moments, I don't believe that people are cruel. I think that they are just ignorant. They don't know what goes on. And I think, for example, when I teach my classes, no one gets through any of my classes. I don't care what the class is. It's relevant to everything I do in philosophy. They have to look at those videos. So knowing some of the very best undercover footage to show, and again, you can ask lots of different people. You can connect with me and I'll send you the 4 links that I use for my classes. But that undercover footage done by wonderful groups like Mercy for Animals, Pete has done some wonderful clips, and those help people to see why this matters. And what I find is once my students have seen those images, they approach the topic differently. If they don't look at those images and they come to class, they'll say, who cares about a chicken? But once they've seen what's actually happening to those chickens, they recognize it's wrong. It's just plain wrong. There's no one that's going to say, who cares about that? It's wrong. So I think showing graphically in some tidy, neat, pretty quick way, if you can, what the problem is will create commonality. And I think that commonality is very important. If they have a religious background, you can create commonality that way. And the third way that I would say is just fundamental ethics, that unless there's something wrong with the person, most of us don't agree that cruelty, terrible cruelty for paltry reasons is a good thing. So that's another great place to start. And Peter Singer is the philosopher. Tom Regan and Peter Singer and their works and their writings really help make those connections well. Did I answer your question?
Yes, Susie. That question was from Susie, and I think that answered
Thank you, Susie.
But
Okay.
Maybe she can type us and let us know.
Okay.
And there also was a question related to sustainable activism, which is how do you keep going when a lot of this can be challenging, and there's an element of despair that's part of it, and how is it that you keep going?
I've had actually a very, very hard year and a half, and struggled a lot more than I did previously with that. And there's a couple things I'll say. The first is that I was born with happy genetics, and that's just the luck of the draw. I'm just a positive person at my core. But if there was ever anything that could eventually wear you down, it is what all of us are doing. It's exhausting, it's depressing, it's sad. I get hit up all the time, every day. Yeah, it's hard. So we have to take care of ourselves. And I really try to be positive. And I know when I took up Facebook, which is very recently, Carol Haddams kindly helped me set up a Facebook page. And I told myself, my site is going to be a place of compassion and humor. So trying to nurture and take care of ourselves and be positive in our own lives, listening to music, going for long walks. And I know my dogs keep me healthy. They demand long walks. So I get lots of outdoor time in the quiet and the beauty of the Montana landscapes with my 3 rogue mutts who drag me all over the place. And so finding what you need. And I think outdoor time is really important. Health is important. So those would be some of my suggestions for things to do. But I think too, turn to other activists. When you need help, don't be afraid to say, I'm hurting. For one thing, it helps others to be gentler with you and to remember that we don't know other people's, what they're struggling with or what's happened to them in the last year or 2 years or 5 years. And so approaching everyone, because we are all vulnerable as human beings, and females in particular are vulnerable, being kind to one another, approaching one another with the assumption that we're struggling and that we need support is, I think, a really good thing to do.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. And this seems like a good opportunity to tell people about our Animal Activist Helpline, which is an initiative from In Defense of Animals that we put together just exactly for that. If you need someone to talk to, if you feel like you're alone and there are other people who don't understand you, the folks who pick up the phone are all trained in nonviolent communication, and they're animal activists as well.
Awesome.
who understand. So you can get some really helpful empathy and feedback, and even strategizing solutions for all the projects that you might be working on related to the animals. So I hope that you all can contact us. I put the contact information in the chat feed early on, but the phone number is 1-800-705-0425.
Thank you for that. And thank you to everybody that does that, who's on the phones. And let's all spread the word that that's out there for people that need.
Yay. Yes, thank you so much. We really can use more calls. We have people there for you, but the tricky part is actually picking up the phone, I think. So
yes.
Also, one of the folks here, Kelly, she asked, what what are the most important things that we should be doing or focusing on as activists who are concerned about ecofeminism?
Oh, well, one of the things that I've started doing now that I have a Facebook page is making feminist memes with animals and connecting those. And another thing I do on Facebook that's related directly to this is when I read other sites, I've seen sites that have made negative remarks about people who work in slaughterhouses. So as ecofeminists, we recognize that those people don't want to work in slaughterhouses. They are usually the disenfranchised. They're people who often don't know English. They're illegal immigrants. They don't have power. So they end up in a job that nobody would want. And so blaming them for the animals that others are eating, rather than those who are putting down their money for those animal bodies, it's not fair. It's not kind. It's blaming the victims. So these kinds of things is watching for other activists who put up things that are sexist, who do things that are racist, who do things that are classist, and gently, politely offering some comment. And for instance, in the case of the slaughterhouses, I would say, I doubt very much that any one of these people working in the slaughterhouse, when they were little kids, said, when I grow up, I'm going to work in a slaughterhouse. You know, it's not negative, it's not blaming, it's just making a statement that everyone can say, wow, that's surely true. Nobody wants to work in a slaughterhouse. Mm-hmm. And then that transforms the conversation away from blaming the people in the slaughterhouses. So it's an example of something you can do with Facebook, which is a great medium for communicating different ideas. And then in our own lives, and this is really important. So ecofeminism began with the idea that the oppression of women and the oppression of the natural environment are linked. This was the beginning. And then, of course, it's reached out, it's extended to all these other isms, all these other forms of oppression. So we are responsible, and I fault animal activists for this. We do not watch for things like organic. And if you can afford to go organic, go organic. You can certainly watch not buying lots of processed foods. Many times the producers of, what do they call, vegan meats, they use way too much packaging. They completely ignore the fact that we need to care about, if you care about the wild animals, you have to care about the natural environment. If you care about the natural environment, you need to cut back on packaging. So as activists, we need to buy products that are not highly packaged. Buy local when you can. Bring your own shopping bag. Don't use plastic bags ever. Don't buy things you don't need. Try in a week never to throw anything out. Recycle everything. Don't use lots of hot water. Don't use lots of water in general. So there's all sorts of things we can do. In my personal life, I catch water from the eaves and use that to do my dishes with and to give my dogs water. I buy everything I buy is secondhand. I won't go through industries which we know harm the environment. Why would I need to? There's so many things out there that I can buy that are secondhand. I try not to be a consumer. I don't buy much in general because I don't need much. I've got 3 dogs and myself. What do we need, really? So thinking environmentally is really important about our own consumption. And then, of course, the other links, not to be racist, not to be sexist, not to be ableist, not to be ageist. These are all things we have to watch for. And we all do need to. We need to recognize our privilege, and we need to train ourselves not to be heterosexist, and not to do things that hurt other people that are like other animals, harmed because they aren't in that A category.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I think we can all do this also just observing conversations that we're having and that we hear other people around us. If you hear them generalizing something such as, oh, people who are cruel to animals, maybe they're looking at China as a country, but they may blame the whole Chinese population for cruelty on animals, which isn't really accurate. There are a lot of activist groups in China.
That's a great example. Not only that, but we tend to accuse China now of eating more and more meat and having these terrible, cruel industries that they learned to do over here. They're taking our practices. But even with the more and more eat that they're doing per capita meat eating, we are heads and shoulders above them. So why are we looking to blame them for something that we have set the standard for? We have created the cruel industries. We've made meat something that you eat so much of. That's an absolutely terrific example. And I think, yes, calling people out. But with that, may I add just one thing, and that's that I understand from my own life, don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up if you should have called someone out and you didn't, because you were afraid, you felt uncomfortable, you weren't strong enough. It happens. It happens to all of us. So try to be positive, call people out. If you can do it with humor, if you can do it through connections rather than creating barriers, that's wonderful. If you can't do it, well, then heal yourself and take care of yourself. And in the future, hopefully, you will be able to, you'll feel stronger and healthier.
And speaking of conversations, we have another interesting question, really. It was a question of how to discuss feminism with women if you're a male ally.
Oh, my goodness. All right. So this is going to be a tough one for me because I'm not a male ally. But I'm sure I can relate to that. How to discuss feminism with women if you're a male ally. Is that the question?
Yes, it is.
Okay, my first words are words of caution. It is, here's how I can relate to that. When I deal with racism, I need to know my privilege, and I really need to know it. And I need to not speak for others. I need to shut up. I need to sit down. I need to listen. I need to learn. I'm white. I have so much privilege because I'm white. And it's, as I learn more and more about my privilege, it's painful. It's incredibly painful to know what I'm part of. And it's embarrassing. It's shaming. And as a woman, I don't need a lot more shaming, but it's shaming. So I would think the process would be very similar for men, that if you are truly, that you have to truly face the sexism that you benefit from and your own privilege, and how you in your past, if not in your present, you know where you're at in this as you learn more, your own treatment of women that is not right when you talk over them or through them or think you know more or benefit from their willingness to do things for you for free. Whatever it is in our culture that benefits male, you benefit from it if you're a male. And that's not to say that you aren't also suffering and taken advantage of in other ways. I'm just saying, I want you to recognize that I can see this as a white woman. I suffer as a woman. I am privileged as a Caucasian. So I would think that for a man, being an ally as a feminist, first and foremost, we have to educate ourselves about the oppressed groups and our own privilege. And I think that's the most important step in being allies.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really insightful. Yeah, and there's another question here also about what are your thoughts on animals that do live free prior to human use and are not specifically targeted by sex, such as like non-farmed fish?
Oh my goodness. Okay, this is a good question. These questions have been terrific. They're all completely different from each other. Thank you all for such great questions. All right, so farmed fish, environmentally, they are a nightmare. So this will link to the environmental aspects of things, that farmed fish in a lot of ways are extremely damaging to the environments around them. Now, if I talk about that, is that what you want, or is there something different you're looking for?
It looks like the example here was non-farmed fish. So maybe they're wild.
Wild.
They're,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the example is, so the question is again?
So, aside from the issue of whether any consumption of any animal is ethical, what are your thoughts on animals that do live free prior to human use and are not specifically targeted by sex, such as non-farmed fish?
Okay, thank you. All right, so in my book, Eating Earth, the second chapter is on fishing, the third chapter is on hunting. So please have a look at those, and you will see all the many reasons why these are horrible things for us to do. They're horrible for the environment. They're horrible for the animals. So if you're taking an animal from the wild, you're messing with an ecosystem. And maybe the biggest thing I can say with regard to that is, because of Fish and Game and the way it's set up in the United States, and I don't know if the question comes from the United States, but certainly if you live in the United States, our government manipulates ecosystems so that we will have more edible animals. So if you want our ecosystems to be manipulated on behalf of hunters, then you should pay down your fee for hunting. But then you also need to realize all of the other things that are wrong with hunting, the wounding rates and the suffering that's involved. and the machismo of it. So in hunting, right, they talk about balls. The lead things are called balls. It's called premature something, and it's a correlate of premature ejaculation, premature firing. The terms, like, there's just a bunch of terms from hunting. They say that going hunting without the kill is like sex without an orgasm. So there's all sorts of very much sexist things that have to do with hunting. Now, this was exposed largely by Marty Keel, and she does great work with that, but it is also included in that chapter on hunting from eating earth. And I'm sorry, I wish I had those available now to kind of read off these list of correlations in how we're viewing and approaching the animal that we're hunting, the great male hunter going out to kill the female, and it is usually females, it's the does that get targeted often. Although it's true, they try to cull out the males because they recognize they can kill a lot more males and still build up the species. The dishonesty of that, of hunting, for example, they say, well, you have to do it for the populations. No, we purposefully have to protect most of our hunted species because of hunting, and that's why they have things like seasons. That's why you can only kill males, because we want, if you have more females, you'll be able to produce more babies. So I think there's a lot of myth around hunting and fishing. And again, these are covered in Eating Earth, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. If you have a look at those chapters and you have questions, I'd be happy to dialogue with you on those. I hope I've answered that question at least somewhat.
Yeah, thank you. I learned some new things too. I didn't know about that. There was another comment that was made, and we'll probably close up following this, but that Kathleen was sharing that she was caring for a woman whose husband owned a slaughterhouse, and then he would go home and he would beat her. So maybe that's an example of some of the things you've been sharing.
There is a great book by Gil Eisnitz called Slaughterhouse. The last chapter of that explores some of these social problems, that abuse, that when you work in a slaughterhouse day in and day out, and you are told to kill as fast as you can without any feeling, of course it affects who you are. And of course it's going to be the children and the women at home. Whoever is lower than you on the hierarchy are going to be the ones that are going to suffer from that. Yes, that's another problem of consuming animals.
Well, I want to thank you and thank everyone for our questions tonight. We really have
terrific questions.
Ones. And also for those of you who spoke out, who used your microphone, we love hearing from you, because that's the cool thing about these webinars. They're very interactive. So I got to hear all about some of the technical issues, but we also want to hear from you, your questions and opinions. So really thanks to everyone for joining us. And also thanks to Lisa. This is a true privilege to have you with us. And
for me as well.
It was really an honor, and all the information that you're sharing with us is really new to a lot of activists. I think I'm relearning these things again myself, so it's really important for us as we go out and approach others to keep in mind how what we do affects and is interrelated with some of the other causes that are out there, so we can kind of stand united and actually really help the animals in the best way we can.
Yes, and thank you all for that. And what is all of my learning in my books and my scholarship if no one's interested? So thank all of you for your good work and your interest in these subjects, and please carry it out into the world.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. And I will be sending everyone who registered for this program, I'll send you a replay link after the event, and I'll also send you the PowerPoint presentation that Lisa put together for us. And hopefully I'll send her contact information. And so if you have any further questions, sounds like she's really eager to hear from you. So that's all good. And that'll come to you sometime in the next week or so. So
thanks, everyone.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And please stay tuned for our other events in this February, month of Activist Appreciation Month, and call the helpline. So those are some other wonderful things. Next week, we have an online gathering, our Vegan Spirituality online gathering, which will feature a woman named Renata Bartoli, and she is well known for her interest in spirituality and reincarnation. So stay tuned for a conversation with her. That will be next Thursday at the same time. So thanks to everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Bye, Lisa.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.